David Allen, the world authority on productivity and the creator of the amazing Getting Things Done. What a privilege and what an honor, sir, to have you visit our center.
Thanks for the invitation, Roger.
So we are building a community of business owners, helping them to support each other to grow, because it gets lonely at the top. And as people start engaging, the operating principle that you discovered and which you have shared so eloquently is that the mind is not designed to store things, it's designed to process things. So what we are doing here is we are creating the conditions for the business owners in small groups to unpack what's going on in their mind into a safe conversation. And when they unpack it in the safe conversation, now themselves and the other people around them now have access and they can process what they're doing. So with the result that, the last 5% of whatever it is that they can't really share, and that's why the experience is lonely at the top, they're now able to share with people and kind of reach a place where they're becoming more and more present to what the opportunities are, the threats are, the resources, strengths, weaknesses, and take those calls. Now, from your whole experience, David, if you can just kind of share, the background and what would really kind of take this to the next level for all of us.
Sure. Well, years ago I discovered the strategic value of clear space.
Right.
If there's no distraction and you're present with whatever it is you're doing, you'll do it better, more elegantly, more creatively. So the whole idea of being able to externalize your thinking is a first step. And so wonderful that you've created an environment where people can start to identify what has their attention. See, if I walked into a group, I would just say, who's got their attention on something? And once you identify what that is, there are 2 or 3 other steps that you need to go through. Once you identify what has your attention, then there is a clarification process that needs to happen, which is, okay, how would I get that off my mind? So my challenging question to all of your business owners would be, what's on your mind? What do you need to do to get it off your mind? Because there's an inverse relationship between on your mind and getting done.
Right.
So you can pretty much bet the most productive people are the people with the clearest heads. And so the way you get a clear head is not by meditating or drinking. I mean, those do what they do, but they don't really get something that you've got attention on off your mind and get it appropriately engaged. See, getting things done is not as much about getting things done as it's about being appropriately engaged with your life. Are you appropriately engaged with your business? Are you appropriately engaged with your family? Are you appropriately engaged with your dog? Are you appropriately engaged with your health? What does appropriate engagement mean? It means I've identified something that's maybe not on cruise control or not on automatic, and I've determined what's the desired outcome that I'm committed to achieve or accomplish or experience, and how would I start moving toward that? How would I start to engage toward that appropriately? So you don't actually need to finish what has your attention to get it off your mind and to get clear, but you do need to identify it, clarify desired outcomes, define next action steps, and then park those reminders in some trusted place that you will see at the right time. That actually is what gets it off your mind. So that's kind of the long, short story of what I spent the last 35 years sort of uncovering and defining and then helping thousands of people implement that, which is that algorithm. What's got my attention? Desired outcome, next action, trusted system, park it. And then engage with that in some appropriate way. That then frees you up to be a lot more creative, strategic, loving, present, whatever it is that you want. It's really about creating space.
In a certain sense, this sounds a little counterintuitive because productivity and producing results kind of has a connotation of I've got to be really focused, I've got to have a lot of things, my projects, my priorities, all of that. And the more concentrated and focused I am, kind of suggests to me that I'm really engaged in something very creative, versus what you're offering is for you to become productive, get to a place where all of that is parked in whatever appropriate way, so that you can then deal with what needs to be dealt with in the moment in a relaxed, with a more sort of focused way.
Exactly. Well, you do need to be able to concentrate and to focus, because I'm not talking about some sort of lazy back, not doing anything. I need to be able to focus, but to your point, and to the point of this methodology, it's a lot easier for me to put the kind of focus I need on my budget, on my hiring, on my business plan, on my whatever it is, as long as I can park everything else in some appropriate place. Not only that, your ability to concentrate is going to a large degree, be based upon your ability to relax. And new science, new cognitive research is basically, if you're not taking a nap every afternoon, at least 20 minutes, if not 90 minutes, you're probably not going to optimize your cognitive ability. If you're not getting at least 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night, your brain is not refreshing itself appropriately. And so you need to be able to then stop at any point in time and do nothing. And your ability to actually do nothing is, to a large degree, how mature you are with this methodology. It doesn't mean you're not doing anything. It means that doing nothing like that allows the brain to reintegrate and adjust. That's why sleeping on something oftentimes gives you the solution in the morning, because sleeping on it is the best way to stop that kind of concentration and let the brain do its work. So there's a lot of new cognitive science that's basically validated what I figured out 30 years ago, and just, I just learned it on the street. I learned, that how powerful this really was, to be able to have a quiet mind so that you could then focus it, appropriately.
So when I look at your journey, in the early part where, over 35 different professions by the time you were 35.
Jobs, I wouldn't call it. Some of them were one-nighters, that was all. But
then, that sort of suggests to me a very robust engagement with life, and kind of looking eyeball to life, and then from there sort of figuring it out. So could you just share with us, in that whole phase about 30 years back, how this process started, and what are the tenets of getting things done, which kind of then would get people to really look at that which is transparent for them. They're not even aware that they need this, which, yes.
Well, as I say, I fell in love with clear space, and one of the ways that I did that was I got a black belt in karate when I was in my 20s. And in the martial arts, at least at the higher levels of training, there are a lot of meditative kind of practices. There may be a spiritual component, but there's a very practical component. If 4 people jump you in a dark alley, you do not want 2,000 unprocessed emails somehow hanging in your psyche. You need to be clear, and you need to be clear, and you need to be clear. And so that ability to be able to focus rapidly and to refocus rapidly was something I tasted in the martial arts. Then when and also my own meditative and spiritual practices, which I've been doing for 50 years. And that, as I began to get into the professional world and my world got more complex, I saw how quick it was to screw up clear space because of how many plates you have start spinning in the air. And as you get more seniors and more responsible, you got a lot more ambiguous things that are not clear, that could probably take up a lot of brain space. So I said, how do I somehow keep the professional world growing and getting more complex and keep the clear space? And that's where I got very hungry to find out what these techniques were. And I had several mentors that taught me various pieces of this. But to the point of what is the methodology, it's actually pretty simple. It's a 5-step process about how you get anything clearer and more under control. First of all, you capture things that have your attention. You clarify exactly what they mean to you and what you're going to do about them, if anything. You then have some sort of a trusted system and an organizational tool to manage the things you can't finish in the moment, that holds, you know, the context and the content of all of your commitments at multiple levels. Then you build a reflection process about all of that on some consistent basis. So then step 5 is you engage, you know, with the trust that now I've looked at all of that, here's the thing to do, as opposed to driven by latest and loudest and hope that was the right thing to do. So it's just making it a lot more conscious process, you know, of how you do what you do. So there's capture, clarify, organize, reflect, and engage. That's how you get your kitchen under control, how you get your company under control. It's how you get your consciousness under control.
The mastermind process is amongst the most powerful processes for people to really get their projects, their jobs, their businesses, their companies to the next level. And one of the most successful masterminds in the world today is from the YPO forum. And what I have discovered that makes it successful is the intersection of a few things. Number one is that they follow a very strict protocol which has been designed. There's confidentiality of the highest order, and the processes are following the principles that you are sharing. It's really about unpacking and putting into the conversation things that, you know, are troubling them, and then once they get that release, there's an emotional release, that there's an objectivity that comes in, and then they work from there. So, you know, from a mastermind process, you know, what are your sort of you know, the ideas that people can take their mastermind to the next level?
Well, you've described a very sophisticated and a very powerful process, and being able to externalize it. Many times we don't know what we think until we start to talk about what we think.
Right.
So oftentimes it'll help give you clarity if you just talk to a tree, if you thought the tree was listening. Right. So having a forum that's safe enough for people to be able to express themselves is terrific, and it is part of this principle that let me externalize this in some way. You are not your work. You do work. Yes. You're not only your life, you have a life. So it's who's the you behind all of that. And that's the one that speaks. That's the one who thinks. That's the one that actually is the source of your intuitive intelligence. But being able to get to that source is not automatic. I mean, you could spend a whole life, you know, in spiritual practices attempting to find out who that is internally and how do I get to it. But I've discovered over all these years, one of the best ways to get to it is to get around people of like mind and be able to, you know, share and engage with each other appropriately. And then, you know, there's a saying, where two or more are gathered, something bigger shows up.
Right.
And I think that's really true as long as there's trust.
Right.
So.
And then, you know, the other elements is balance, which I'm hearing in the background when you're saying, are you appropriately engaged with all the things that are unfolding? Because inappropriate engagement leads to a lack of balance and a lack of freedom. So this kind of a forum process allows people to find where they are inappropriately engaged and then kind of backtrack, find that balance and move forward and get that freedom and the presence in the moment to be able to then tackle all the things that they need to tackle.
Exactly. Well, you don't have to go very far to
Right.
see where to do this. You just notice what has your attention.
Brilliant.
And because usually the things that have your attention are things that are not on cruise control. They're not on automatic. Something about that situation either hasn't been decided, hasn't been determined, or hasn't been organized appropriately yet. That's why it's on your mind. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just an indicator that that's where I need to go. So if your health is on your mind, or your relationship with your life partner is on your mind, or your budget is on your mind, whatever any of those are, if I were coaching you, I would say, well, great, what has your attention? Then, you know, we would just identify what that thing is and say, well, what would you like to have true about that? And we identify the desired outcome. And what's the very next step If you had nothing else to do but to deal with the budget or deal with your health or deal with your partner, if you had nothing else to do but move toward that outcome, where would you go right now? Would you surf the web? Would you make a call? Would you draft ideas? Would you have a conversation? What's the very next thing that you would need to do? If you haven't determined that yet, then you're not yet appropriately engaged with this thing. That's why the next action, which is a core element of the getting things done process, is so powerful, because it grounds all of those things that have your attention. Maybe that's not exactly the best action to take. You'll find out, but you need to engage. Engage with it in some appropriate way. And what's interesting is once you actually start to identify what has your attention, go through this process to get it off your mind, then you discover what really has your attention.
Right.
Which then you get to take this to a more subtle level. Okay, well, great. What would I need to do to get that off my mind? What would I need to do to get that off my mind? Oh, wow. So I think we're a teleological being. I think we're always striving to be more, have more, express more, expand more. And this doesn't get rid of challenges. It allows you to appropriately engage with what that challenge is, as opposed to complain about it or feel the victim of it. So what this does is it really throws you into the driver's seat of your life in a very elegant and sometimes very subtle way.
So as you were speaking, I was visualizing, a process of charge and discharge. So what has your attention, there's a charge. And the moment you identify what's the immediate next step, the first step, there's a discharge that takes place, there's a relaxation, and then you move to the next. Now what has got my attention, where's the charge, what's the next step? Again, there's a discharge. So it's a charge, discharge kind of a thing, so I think what I'm getting from this whole, the real objective is to get to that space of balance and enough freedom to be then able to appropriately engage with all the resources that we have, with all the 10,000 things that need to be done in a
Sure.
way in which we really get them done.
Exactly. And you can only do one thing at a time.
Right.
Consciously, in terms of conscious attention on anything. You can switch rapidly, but you can only do one at a time. So it's a case of the glass half full or half empty. Is the one thing you're doing the exact thing you need to be doing, given why you're on the planet and all your commitments and everything else? Or you're feeling bad that you're not doing whatever all those things are because of what else you're doing. And to your point about balance, I would say what you're really after is to be in your zone, right, where time disappears. Because when time disappears, there is no distinction between personal and professional. There's no balance, imbalance. It's just called what's now, what's now, what's now, what's now. So I've for 35 years, I have not made any distinction between personal or professional. It's just what's next. And if you're in your zone, it's all the same. It's just what's next.
So we were in Masai Mara a couple of years back, and one of the things I saw there were all the animals were in the now and just dealing with what they needed to deal with. They didn't have plans. They didn't have the past, the present, and the future.
Sure.
There was a continuity, and I think from there they are able to sort of, in their own way, craft an existence that really works for them. So it seems to me that there is an internal nature, also all the busyness that's around us, that how we get caught up and the energies get caught up in all of these different things. So, for business owners who are worried about all of these things, there seems to be a principle that they've embraced, and that principle, and they kind of even sort of pride themselves at their ability to multitask. And from what you just shared, it's very, very clear that multitasking or parallel processing versus sequential processing. So the power lies in sequential processing, on focusing on one thing, getting that complete and moving forward. So how do we get these very, very busy business owners to really embrace what's the real, approach to productivity and really get things moving as opposed to spinning the wheels in loose sand?
Well, it's a good question, and the answer comes back to the basics
Right.
of identifying what
Yeah.
are those things they're spinning about. And spin is not very productive. It's really, worry is not productive. If it was, the world would be a lot better because people worry so much. And the world, to your point, the world is not confused. The world's not overwhelmed. It's fine. It's only how we are engaged with the world that creates the sense of overwhelm or sense of confusion. And once you really kind of get this, and once you really start to do this practice on a regular basis, there's a kind of a maybe Zen-like quality where you are even fine with your overwhelm and your confusion.
Right.
You go, it's fine. Especially when you know how to clean it up if you want to. See, the dangerous thing I sometimes run across is, I've done this for so many years, it's just so habitual in terms of my lifestyle, that I give myself the freedom to be spontaneous and let things just all kinds of fall apart because I know I can fix it real fast.
Right.
So I'm not too bothered when I'm overwhelmed or have too many emails or too many whatever. I go, fine, they'll live. People know how to find me if they need me. And it's one thing at a time, one foot in front of the other.
The other, dynamic that I'm seeing when businesses move from being solopreneurs to getting a team of people around, how do they take their business to the next level after getting this team around? And, from your experience, what's the way in which they can get everybody to focus on the things that they really need to focus on, as opposed to all the, I'm right, you're wrong, should, must, could, have to, all that stuff. And, really providing leadership in that team as opposed to having a bunch of assistants. So it's then the same model where you're a solopreneur, now you're a solopreneur with a bunch of assistants. So in that, what's the immediate next step that they really need to take to move in that direction and move forward?
Well, the real next step is a radical one.
Okay.
What's the purpose of the business? Because that has to be the driver of everything. Once you understand what the purpose of the business is, then what are the roles that need to be filled and the accountabilities of those roles that are going to achieve that purpose. Until you do that, you don't know how to allocate people. You don't know what to do with them. So a solopreneur needs to identify, if they're going to start to expand, they need to identify what are all the different hats they have been wearing. What are all the different roles they have been playing? And once you identify those roles, then you can say, well, which ones of these are you not so good at that would be really great to have somebody handle that role with that accountability? But that's not an easy process. See, our company's been involved in something called Holacracy for 7 years, which is a very, very role-based, purpose-driven way to organize a business. We don't have job titles. We just have roles and accountabilities, and people are identified with that role. And that role has its own purpose and its own accountabilities. And so going through the process of defining that, that's challenging, but necessary if you really want to have clarity organizationally. See, I could be clear, you could be clear, Rajesh, but we get together, boy, you've now expanded exponentially how confusing things can get.
Right.
In terms of what did you agree to? What have I agreed to? What are you accountable for? What am I accountable for? And that becomes a very necessary conversation to then be able to externalize that and become objective about what those things are.
So if you look at, the way people organize, quote unquote, themselves, their businesses, comes from organizational theory. We had an organizational chart, and this person reports to this person, and so on and so forth, which then becomes dysfunctional pretty quick, versus what you are, saying in such an elegant way is that what's the purpose of the business, and from the purpose of the business, what needs to happen, and what are the roles that need to be played, and who's playing that role, and what is his accountability. And if we stay focused with that, with no designations and no clutter of organizational theory, then that kind of just moves things forward, and then from time to time you can take stock of, has the role shifted, has the accountability shifted, are we done with that, do we need to expand, contract, and mix and match. So how does one get started on that, David?
I don't know. You just start. I think you need to find good models and good coaches.
Right.
That have been down that road before that can help coaches. We've still using coaches to help our organization, even though we're pretty good at it ourselves. But sometimes you just need an outside view, or you need somebody who has seen multiple ways that this has been handled.
Right.
And that can make you feel okay that you're not totally unusual, that this is going on. Again, great reason for mastermind kinds of groups, so that you find out, oh, they got the same problem, and here's how they dealt with it. Not that you would deal with it the same way, but it certainly makes you feel a lot better to understand that these are universal issues that show up just in the nature of that. Interestingly, the same principle about a clear mind, do you have a clear organization? One way you can start to identify is what has the organization's attention or tension. Where's the tension in the organization? Is the tension on hiring? Is it on compensation? Is it on budget? Is it on vision? Is it on strategy? Where's the tension? What does the organization have its attention on? And then how do I relieve that? What do we need to do to either define a role, change a role, get rid of a role, add an accountability, eliminate accountability? So I think finding good models that you can start to work with is pretty important.
So it's very heartening to hear that an organization which is led by you, that you hire coaches. And, so one of the things that business owners, I'm seeing them in 3 different buckets. Bucket number 1 are people who are clear that working with a coach can help them accelerate their growth. Bucket number 2 don't want to go to a coach, but now they are stuck, and the only way out is to get a coach to move forward. And bucket number 3 is, look, we can't be bothered with coaches. We want to do stuff on our own. And so what is the way in which one can communicate that, listen, there are these processes that are available. People have been there, done that. And once you work with a coach, you can really move things forward. So, how do you get that?
Well, in the Getting Things Done model that, I've engineered really is just really identifying the multiple levels that we have commitments. And I've identified essentially the 6 horizons that we have commitments about. There's purpose, there's the vision of that purpose being fulfilled, there's the goals and objectives we need to accomplish to make the vision happen, there's all the accountabilities and roles that need to be maintained so that we've got a healthy enterprise. Then there's all the projects we have to finish about all those things, and then there's all the action steps we need to take. I couldn't get it any simpler than that. So you have all of those multiple levels there. The reason I say that is because if people think they don't need any help, they're not playing a big enough game.
Wow.
Come on. I've had people tell me that if your business hasn't set a goal that would take at least 100 years to manifest, you may not be playing a big enough game. Now, there's nothing right or wrong about that. I wouldn't make that a judgment that people, maybe they're fine exactly where they are. So I'm not going to try to poke somebody and tell you you're not fine.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm suggesting that if people really start to focus on their vision, God, my vision and purpose really is that we create a world where there are no problems, there are only projects. I need all the help I can get. Right? We barely started, so I got a big game. And so anybody that can help, that's why I'm very happy to talk to you, talk to people about what this methodology is. There may be somebody out there that'll hear it, that it'll improve their condition. So that's what I'm about. So if somebody is not interested in any help, they're either, that's fine with me. It's called get to a no as fast as you can.
So beautifully said. So it's the context of of your life really. If the context is small and you can manage it, then you don't need any help. But if your context is really huge, and then this whole thing of how do I build my competencies, how do I get productive, my efficiencies, my effectiveness, all of these kind of conversations begin to open up, and then very quickly, you really begin to realize that you're at the mercy of the Peter principle, that you've now risen to your level of incompetency, and then you want to move forward, which is, people really think that that's quote unquote a bad thing. But then I kind of think, when I was in the 7th standard and I finished my curriculum, I wrote my exam, I was promoted to the 8th standard, I experienced myself as capable but not competent to write the 8th standard exam. I had to go through the whole curriculum to really, gain competency. So I think, this whole process of what, so there's a doingness that I'm hearing in your work, what I've been observing, which is the getting things done, follow the steps. But at the end of the day, it's the whole beingness that's getting freed up. There's presence, and in that presence, the ability to relate to human beings, to relate to whatever your situations are. So in this kind of a space of, what's your simple, elegant model that becomes aspirational for people, from your own experience? Because at the end of the day, as a world authority in your subject, there is people, they aspire to something which is very simple. So how would you articulate or describe that?
Well, it really comes down to the essence of productivity, which is what are you trying to accomplish, and then how do you move forward to make that happen? Right. So where are you going? What's the next step? Outcome and action of the zeros and ones, really, of what do you need to do? Now that can become quite complex and subtle in terms of what do you want? Right. What do you want to experience? What do you want to have? What do you want to be? How do you want this to show up, at some point? And then how do I move forward toward that? Interestingly, over the years, I've found people resist those two things like the plague. If you look at most people's to-do lists, they're things like mom or bank. Right. You say, well, mom, yeah, you probably had one, so why is it on the list? Oh, her birthday's coming. Great. What are you going to do about mom's birthday? Oh, I don't know. Yeah. So they've identified something that's got their attention, but they're not appropriately engaged with mom and birthday yet. Mm-hmm. They have to decide they're going to give her a party. What are they going to do? And if so, what's the next step? Oh, I need to call my sister, see what she thinks about mom's birthday. Great. Now you're appropriately engaged. So it really has to do, this outcome and action thing is really the zeros and ones, but we're not born doing that. You actually have to learn that process. It's a cognitive muscle you have to train. And interestingly, why it's so challenging for people, I think, I discovered recently, is that those two things use two different parts of your brain. The vision part uses the forebrain, that part of you, the frontal cortex, where it sees the picture, it sees the image, it sees the desired outcome. But the limbic part is the one that actually executes, and it's right. Actually it gets you going. It gets you active. That's taking activity. The interesting thing is once you've trained yourself to think that way and to engage with your world that way, then you start to experience the beingness. What seems to be true, at least from my experience, is that on this planet and this material world, we're teleological, and the way to be is to do. So the people that I know that I would say are the most being kind of people are high doers. Right. They really are. And it's not about sweat or work harder or spend more time. It's about I'm appropriately engaged in what I'm doing. Because even when I meditate, that's not going unconscious. It's a very conscious process. I'm very focused on meditating. Or I'm very focused on taking a nap. See, there's a power nap, and then there's a nap to avoid your life. The right. Power nap just looks at everything and says, time for a nap. I'm out. Or time for a beer, or time for to work on the strategic plan, or time to do this, that, or the other. Again, it comes back to when you have that sense of just being present, there's no distinction between being and doing.
You know, you presence this distinction of being appropriately engaged in different ways. Could you share, you know, this distinction in a way in which people can really get what is this thing called being appropriately engaged? Because to my mind, you know, am I appropriately engaged with someone versus am I appropriately engaged with a project? But you use it with this appropriately engaged with so much of flexibility that I'm trying to sort of really distinguish it for myself from the way you are distinguished.
Well, come on, Rajesh, you have a lot of things that are not on your mind right now.
Yes.
Why? Because you're appropriately engaged with them. It's that simple.
Right.
That's simple. And I don't care how you get it off your mind. I say, what do you do? What do you need to do to get it off your mind? Maybe you need to delegate it to somebody. Maybe you need to just go, screw it, I'm just not going to bother about it. If it shows up, I'll just let it show up. And you have no more attention on it. You just renegotiate the agreement with yourself. I don't need to do anything about that. That's appropriate engagement. But it's actually going through this same clarification process. What is it? Is it actionable, yes or no? If it's not actionable, then it's either trash or it's reference material or it's something you just might want to do later but not now. And if it is actionable, then okay, what's the next action? And if one action won't finish it, what's the project? What's the outcome? Right. So it's this, you know, I just discovered that algorithm. That's how you get appropriately engaged with it. But it's highly flexible. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put that on someday maybe. Or, you know, I'm just going to make a call about that and see what happens. It's as flexible as life is. But the principle is steady and stable. There's no, if you get something off your mind, really get it off your mind, get it under cruise control, you will have done this.
So appropriately engaged and cruise control go together.
Mm-hmm.
Inappropriately engaged and having things on your mind, you know, that kind of is the distinction, really.
Yeah, if on your mind, by the way, is just doing creative developmental thinking, and that's just fun, and just many times I'm just grazing. Look at that, oh, there's a clock over there. Hey, they're filming this. That's a great camera, right? I'm just grazing.
Right.
But if I look at it and I go, I want that camera, but I can't buy it right now, then I'm gonna be pulling out my little pen and paper and writing that down. Research Lumix cameras.
Right.
Right? Because now I'm appropriately engaged with it because it was on my mind. If I didn't write that down, there's a part of me going, David, you made a commitment. David, you made a commitment. David, you made a commitment. And this thing is going to start buzzing inside of my head somewhere, right? And so I just learned that's what I need to do is to capture. And then later on, I'll clarify whether that was a dumb idea or not, whether I'm actually going to do anything about it. And if I am, then what would doing look like? So. And
I think the key distinction that I just sort of got in this moment is that from your example of that camera, and you say, I want it, but I can't afford it, then you take it out, you don't write camera, you said research the camera, which means that what's the next step I'm going to take about it, which is actionable, and the moment I put it there, now I can let it go.
Well, it could be. For the most part, I would just write camera because it's fast.
Right.
Because I don't want to stop what we're doing here.
Sure.
And so I just grab a thing, but I will sooner than later throw that little note into my own in tray, pick it up and go, okay, what is this? And then I may come up with a project called research, R&D camera.
Right.
Right, for which I'll have a next action, to your point.
Right.
Sometimes you may make that action decision immediately.
Right.
No need to hold back on that. But it's nice to have the freedom to just capture like crazy. That's why in your mastermind groups, you want people to have the freedom to just get anything off their mind without having it perfect or having figured out what they're going to do about it.
Right.
But don't let it lie fallow. That's then where you need to go through the clarification process. Okay, now what do you need to do about that? But you need the freedom to identify anything. I probably throw away 80 or 90% of my notes. I just don't know which 80 or 90% those are right now, because when I'm having the idea, of course it's brilliant because I had the idea.
Yeah.
I wake up in the morning and go, who are you kidding?
Yeah.
What a dumb idea. So you want the freedom to be able to do that. That's why these are two very different processes, but it's a holistic model. I need the freedom to just go, yeah, and then I need the discipline to go, what does the mean? What am I going to do about that? What commitment, if any, am I making about this, and what would doing look like?
One of the things that I'm discovering, as working with business owners is, asking them to identify the emotion and what is the memory that's associated with that emotion. And when they start doing that, there seems to be some sort of unraveling that takes place for themselves as well as the other people, where there's no advice, there's no leading, there's nothing. And then from there is now from what you just said, it's kind of becoming clear for me that what that process does is ultimately gets them to identify what's the very next action they can take. And once they've got that clarity, that emotion, the negative emotion, the charge dissipates.
Sure.
The situation still remains the way it is, but then they move forward from there.
Exactly.
So I think that's the missing.
Yeah, what my process, the getting things done process, doesn't really deal with the emotional things directly.
Right.
It has a huge emotional impact, to your point, once you get a lot clearer about that. Interestingly, we have a partner now delivering our work in South Africa, and he is a practicing psychotherapist and psychologist, as well as now a GTD trainer. And so I asked him, I said, so tell me about the relationship that you see between therapy and getting things done. He said, well, therapy often addresses things that getting things done doesn't address directly. He said, but once people start to practice the getting things done methodology, it makes them much clearer about what their issue really is.
Right.
Because a lot of people, one negative thing that you're not appropriately engaged with can color your whole life gray, especially if it's an important area. Your whole life will feel confusing and overwhelming if you're got a major financial problem or a major relationship problem or a major any kind of problem makes your whole life feel like a problem, as opposed to that's that specific thing, and it allows us to be able to identify that and isolate what that thing is and how to engage with it. So it was interesting to hear from William, my guy in South Africa, that he found if you haven't done this getting things done, clear your head kind of process, then people are so unclear about what's unclear for them. And it makes it much more difficult to pinpoint what are those emotions about what, and where does that come from.
The other question that just, in your speaking has come up to me is, I would like to formally introduce getting things done in our community. So what would be the next steps and how do we get that kind of?
Well, the best thing to do if you haven't met him yet is Mohammed, El Hawa is our partner and master trainer in Egypt, but he has the whole Middle East region. We also have master trainers and partners in Bangalore. What do they call that now?
Bangalore, yeah.
Yeah.
Bengaluru.
Bengaluru, yes, in Bengaluru. So they're giving public seminars about this and also doing coaching about this, all over the regions in the area. We have people all over the world actually now doing that.
Yeah.
So that's a great way to do it. And of course, if you read English, well, my book's in 30 languages, so whatever language you want. But the book itself is a whole manual about all this, and as you know, I wrote a new edition of the Getting Things Done book, a couple of years ago.
Right.
So that's a manual for all this. A lot of people though look at that and they feel a little overwhelmed because I put the whole thing in there. Whereas if you meet somebody who's any of our trainers that are really really good, or you hear somebody talk about this, or that's oftentimes a way to experience it, to feel motivated by it, whatever.
So in the last 1 year, my focus has shifted for these business owners. I'm getting them all focused on the fundamental reason why the business is in existence is to generate cash and they can generate cash if their clients are generating cash or equivalent of cash or proxy of cash. Now, with this sort of central axis, productivity now becomes the key roadblock, and that's the context in which I asked you the question.
Well, I'll sort of challenge that a little bit. I would say that the primary driver of a business is producing value.
Yes.
Because if you want to make more money, produce more value.
Yes. I mean,
and value is a two-way street too. You have
Yeah.
to, the person has to perceive there's value to get
Right.
out of what you're doing, and then you create the appropriate exchange.
So our architecture is, generate cash, and that comes from producing value, and we define value as the current state of your client and the after state, and what's the gap, and can you increase that gap so that you create more value, and that is basically what it is about. So I'm weaning them away from the conversation called generate profits, because profit is not an exact science. You can keep changing it by changing so many things, whereas cash is cash, and that kind of seems to get people focused on creating value, as opposed to making all the cosmetic changes to make the profit go up and down, valuation of the stock and this and that, all that stuff.
Sure.
So I think this has been absolutely enriching, brilliant. David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and share from your vast ocean of experience, which has been kind of diluted in just one drop of being present.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the invitation and appreciate such a great, this is a fun interview, fun conversation to have.
Thank you.
So, yeah.